and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. I'm your host, Emma Thomas, founder of The Triple Shift and Managing the Menopause. My guest today is an award-winning journalist of 21 years, author, having previously worked as UK executive editor and global lifestyle head for HuffPost. Poorna Bell also specialises in women's issues, diversity, fitness, pro-aging and mental health, and has freelanced for The Times, The iPaper, Grazia, The Guardian, Red Magazine and Stylist, amongst others. She's an experienced public speaker, from doing keynotes to moderating events, hosting and running seminars, and has spoken on Channel 5, ITV and BBC News, and is a regular fixture on BBC Radio. She's also published 3 non-fiction books and 2 novels, one of which I very much enjoyed on my summer holiday last year. And her new book, She Wanted More, is out on the 26th of February. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Emma.
I'm going to sneak in an extra sneaky question first. When did you first realise that you wanted to be a writer, in inverted commas?
Ooh, do you mean like in a professional sense, or like this is what I enjoy doing?
Ooh, I guess in a professional sense, in terms of this is the direction that I want to go in. Was there any particular kind of moment?
I think it was when I had my first job, actually, as a writer. Well, I say writer, I was kind of an unpaid intern. And I think I was debating whether or not to go into broadcast or whether to go into writing. I think part of that, even though all the sort of signs were there for me to go into writing, which was, in school, it was a subject that I did the best at. I really enjoyed it. I would do sort of creative writing, even if it wasn't for school, and really, really enjoyed sort of, just writing little stories and sort of writing my diary and stuff. But I think I thought that broadcast sounded like it would be a really cool thing to do. And then I tried getting into it and I was like, oh my God, this is impossible. And I think around that time, this would have been when I had just come out of university, sort of the early noughties. And a friend of a friend was working at this really like local niche Asian newspaper and just said, look, we need someone to do sort of odd jobs around the paper. Do you want to do it? And the alternative was, I was doing a job at the time, which was trying to sell people double glazing windows. So I was
I've been there. I didn't last long.
Yeah. And so I think I started that job just, obviously very grateful to have the internship initially and then for that to kind of transition into a job. But I think it was when I wrote a profile of the astronaut who, Kalpana Chawla. I don't know if you're aware, like hugely inspirational person. She died in, I want to say, I'd love to remember that it was maybe an Apollo something or a Discovery something. I can't remember, but it was in 2003, I want to say 2002, 2003. And I wrote a profile of her because the fact that she was a female astronaut, the fact that she was Indian, my cultural background is Indian, it really hit, I think, a lot deeper than perhaps another story that I might have been working on. And I think being able to just dig into her life and write a profile on how she was as a person and just how inspirational she was as a person, that is when I kind of felt something shift. And I was like, oh, actually, you can kind of tell people stories and change hearts and minds and, and surface stories that might not otherwise have been told. I mean, that crash was like very, very high profile. So, I don't know that we would have done a profile on her if that hadn't happened, which is obviously the greatest tragedy of it all. But I think that was the moment where I thought, I think I want to do this as a living.
Light bulb moment. So talk to us about She Wanted More, and I'm really interested to know why you decided to write it and whether the process of carrying out the research that informs the book itself, did going through that kind of process of researching and then writing it, did that change you at all? And if so, how?
So the book is for women, really, it's for women of any age, if whatever stage of life that you're at. But the demographics that I focused on were women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, a little bit in their 70s, but it is those 3 main decades. part of that was because I was starting to notice a kind of zeitgeist shift in terms of decisions that women in these age groups were making around the arrangements of their relationships, whether they were choosing to get back into a relationship after divorce, or being widowed, or being
Mm.
single for a long time. Also, they were making like different choices around their careers. I felt that they were starting to question what is the definition of success. It's I would say that the sort of the main definition is very money and power. For me personally, I feel like a lot of that is very keyed into patriarchy. And so, women are told that this is how you get status and success in your career, in a system that was never designed to support and actually really allow them to advance anyway. And so I felt like there were women who were just opting out of that and just
Mm.
choosing different things and prioritizing different things. There were a couple of studies that backed up definitely the stuff around children and relationships. So, a reluctance amongst women to have children, or rather like questioning it maybe in a way that previous generations hadn't done. And I just felt these shifting plates around like what is purpose, what is status. And so that is where I was very interested in looking at different stories for women. And it was very, very important for me to caveat that, this wasn't sort of saying, this wasn't kind of like pushing a way of life towards women. What I wanted was to create a book in which, whatever their identity, whether they have kids, whether they don't, whether they're married, whether they're not, that it was something that was going to help them create agency, change if needed, but for them to just really almost do an inventory with themselves as to, what is my life? What do I need in order to feel power and intention in my life? And so that is the summary of the book. I think that really for me, it's something I've been thinking about ever since I turned 40. I think the really, really big catalyst around that was just the conversations around things before I turned 40. And, everyone sort of in the sort of the age cohort that I was in, just really how we were talking about it, like it was the end of the world, and life would be terrible. And it seems so ridiculous when I think about it in retrospect, knowing what I now know. But I think that it was that sort of sense of doom. It was turning 40 and realizing that the world didn't end. It was slowly over time. So I'm 45, seeing that things can progress and move upwards on an upwards trajectory. That's not the narrative that we're told in
No.
society, you know. And I think that sort of alongside that, I was also seeing an increased visibility of women, especially in their 50s and 60s, in areas that we hadn't seen them before. So fashion was definitely one of them, and fashion has been the case for quite a while, to be honest. But I'm talking about like areas like sport, travel, even like aesthetics, like women in their 60s getting like, full arm sleeves or tattoos. And I'm not suggesting that that's what you need to do, in order to like reject social norms or anything like that. But I was just really interested by the variety of it. And what I was comparing it to was what, my mother and her generation, in which there was little to no variety within the choices that they made, because obviously they had fewer options. Some of them were not presented as options to them, and some of them weren't options at all. And I really wanted to chart that and put that together to, I think, help other women figure out their own way.
Yeah. Was there anything that came out of that research that really surprised you?
I think one of the things for sure is that, so the majority of women who took the survey were 40 plus. I did open it up to women from their mid 20s onwards, just because I also wanted to see the differences in sort of decades, and like how, whether or not there was a difference in terms of like, let's say the sort of the far end of Gen X to maybe the middle end of Gen Z. I think that the question that I asked was around, what they felt was the most important thing to them as they got older. And I fully expected it to be something like a romantic partner or even kids, to be honest. And it wasn't like it was friendship. So to me, I was very surprised by that. Perhaps I shouldn't have been, because I think that when I considered and when I spoke to women who were in their 60s who seemed to like just really, really have it together, and seemed that like they were at a really good level in terms of the confidence that they felt and also just how peaceful they felt. Community and friendship was definitely a massive part of that. So I think that to me made me feel really optimistic that it doesn't matter whether you have kids or not, whether you're married or not, that was like a thing that could unite us all, even, though we may have made different choices. I think the stuff I learned about menopause was so helpful because I was writing the book when I was in my first year of perimenopause. And I think it just taught me, it was just very, very valuable. Like it taught me things that I hadn't known before. And I interviewed Mariella Frostrup for that chapter. And that is a chapter that I think anyone of any age should read, because there's a lot of stuff that I still quote from that chapter to friends. Still quote, the book hasn't come out yet. But I tell, and they also have like no idea, and like the thing about, like, for example, it's only been 2 years since GPs had to have mandatory training in it, which is just mind blowing to me. Or like, the sort of age at which if you get help around perimenopause at a younger age, you offset so many of the negative consequences, of what it can do to your body and your mind long term. So that was something that I felt is still very precious to me.
And I love the fact that you're advocating for the adoption of the word climacteric instead of this kind of menopause transition, which I mean, I'm obviously kind of aware of the word, but hadn't really given it much thought for a while. But just this sort of idea that it sounds, much more much more dramatic and kind of all encompassing, kind of like this huge weather event system that just kind of takes over everything.
Yeah, like I've never heard a word that sounds more like a lightning bolt, I mean, that's it that I was really surprised when I found that word out. And so for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, the climacteric refers to the entire scope of menopause. So what we actually call menopause, unless I am getting this wrong, is after you stop your periods. And actually that is a very short space of time in between like perimenopause and post.
It's technically it's one day, so it's kind of the day where you tip over from the sort of peri to the post. So it's a weird, it is a weird word. When people use it, a lot of the time they're talking about that transitional period.
They're referring to the whole thing. And also I think what it did for me was it helped me to, I think it shifted power and focus onto two ends of the spectrum of that, which I think that I can only speak for myself here, which hitherto I had not known that much about. Like I thought that once menopause was over, that was it. There wasn't really anything to kind of say about it beyond that, which obviously I now know not to be the case.
Ride off into the sunset.
Yeah. And people sort of referring to perimenopause as menopause and saying, oh, well, it starts much earlier than we think. And I'm like, no, that's perimenopause. Perimenopause starts at the age that actually it probably always has done. We just didn't know that's when it kind of started. And the other thing that I also found out, which I didn't know, was around Black and Hispanic and Asian women starting perimenopause about a couple of years, 2 to 3 years earlier than Caucasian women, which was very helpful to understand. But yeah, so I did quite like the fact that it, as a word, I think it encompasses all of it. And so I think it merits a closer look at than just this sort of one specific period in time. Because I was having a conversation with someone about this the other day and they were like, surely you're too young to be in perimenopause. And I was like, I'm just too tired to have this conversation now, so please Google.
We're all too tired. You talk about your own, you do talk a little bit about your own symptoms, and I just love that description of the sort of the giant stingrays carrying dread, despair, and fear, because I'm sure that's going to resonate with a lot of people, and or maybe people don't understand that actually that kind of that anxiety and that doominess is actually incredibly common. Do you think we're getting the balance right between, obviously we need to educate people, we need people to understand what could be going on, what to expect, but do you think there's an element of, with the kind of younger generation, some of the people that you might have been speaking to, of sort of that negativity, because a lot of the perhaps the media coverage might be more biased, skewed towards the sort of negative experiences?
I mean, it's hard to say. I think we've still got a ways to go, is my assessment of it. I think that I understand why there is almost an overcorrection, because obviously there was nothing before. And and there have been so many important wins, which has been done by menopause campaigners. Like Mariella's obviously one of them. Just the inclusion of menopause in sort of, I think it was like the Equal Rights Act, when it comes to like workplace and inclusion and all of that kind of stuff, and making sure that menopause is like wrapped up in that. I may have got the name of that wrong. But so, and that, I don't know if that would have happened without campaigning. But so I think that the focus on it is very important. And I think that it is amazing that we now have resources out there. What I would say though is, I still think that mostly we are scaring people around it. And what I mean by that is that I was very scared around it. I don't know that it was in terms of, and again, I can only speak to my own experience of it. It wasn't from like reading posts or reading articles, because if I'm being really honest, before I was in perimenopause, I wasn't reading those articles. Yeah. And very often, which it makes total sense, is that you are going to get those articles from people who are experiencing the worst end of those symptoms, because that's just how we kind of report the news. That's how, lifestyle features are crafted. You're not going to like do a lifestyle story if you're a newspaper and someone that's having a medium to okay experience with, menopause.
It wasn't that bad.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't great, but it wasn't bad, the end. So I think that I do understand why there's also an overemphasis of all the negativity, because that's just not what really you get clicks around or sells papers or whatever. But so I think education is really important. I think it's really important to know that around 30% of women, I think it is, like experience like the more severe end of the symptoms. And then for maybe the rest of us, I'm not saying it's like great or, it's a walk in the park, but it's not terrible. And there is help out there, and there are things that can be done to offset it. There's things that we can do lifestyle wise as well that can help with all of these things. And I think having access to that information is really important. Where I think that we are going wrong is how we are having the conversation with each other. And I actually was so tempted to do a video on this, because it was mind-blowing to me how many people told me that I was in perimenopause just from me saying that I was feeling slightly hot that day because I was wearing a coat that was too warm and I was feeling really sweaty. And then I had a friend of mine who was like, well, it's perimenopause. And before I even said anything, it's like, well, it'll be great like to start HRT because, so many women wish that they started it. It was like this onslaught, and I hadn't asked for the advice. I hadn't said anything, and I wasn't in perimenopause at that point in time. I literally, because I hate being cold, was wearing something that was too warm for me. I don't get hot flushes. I always had like a sense that if I was going to start getting symptoms, it probably would be along like how things would affect me more mentally, probably stuff to do with my hair maybe. But I felt like I was being told what my health was by other women who A, were not doctors, and B, were using their lived in experience to tell me how I was feeling. And I just thought that it is unacceptable to do that to another woman. I'm sorry, it is. I think that you have to wait until someone either like brings it up in conversation, or you can ask a gentle question like, do you think you might be, rather than like a proclamation or a statement. And every time that happened, I would feel this wall go up, and I just didn't want to talk about it. Like I did not want to, women above a certain age, I didn't want to have the conversation. I probably wouldn't tell them anything about my health or how I was physically feeling. And when I've sort of now kind of like looked back on it in retrospect, I realize it's coming from a good place. Like if you've had a really bad experience with it, if you've had, especially with your doctors, right? Like you felt like your doctors haven't listened to you, you don't want someone else to go through the same experience. And so you kind of want to save that from that. You want to save them from that. But there has to be a balance struck, because I feel like most women I know who I speak to in their late 30s, probably like very, very early 40s, are scared shitless by the way that we're having this conversation. And I think what I'm really glad of is that now that I'm here, now that I'm in it, I don't talk about it to everyone in my life. I literally have like one person, and that's mainly my sister, who I talk to about it. Because if I try and talk to certain other friends about it, I'm either told that I should be following this person because they've like recommended X, Y, and Z. And again, I haven't asked for
tell you which supplements you should be taking.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Long list of supplements. Haven't asked for the information. I do think though, maybe in a couple of years, maybe a little bit longer than that, I think we will find a balance between the two. I think that we will be able to offer guidance if it's needed, when it's needed, in a way that just doesn't push people away from the conversation. And I get that, we have to have a conversation about it that's like realistic and that is informing people. But I also do feel that we are missing the other part of the conversation, which is that there can be good things that come along with it. And obviously, like, the most common one is just, I don't know, just not giving a shit about stuff as much anymore, really, which is quite liberating. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that leads on quite nicely to. I was going to pull out this quote. Well, you're actually quoting someone called Ashley Kelch in the book, and one of the things I really enjoyed actually was that I discovered lots of people that I need to go in, follow, and find out about their work. So thank you for that. But the quote from Ashley is, the most disruptive act in midlife isn't leaving your job or your relationship. It's leaving behind the version of yourself that you created in order to survive. And are there parts of, looking at your experience, are there parts of or versions of yourself that you feel like you're leaving or have left behind in midlife?
I think so. I would say that the sort of heartwarming thing is that we're not all so different from each other, because it's a lot of the same things that the women that I mentioned in the book have said, which is that I think it's definitely seeking validation less. And understanding that validation is also subjective. We're currently having a conversation, for example, at the moment around beauty standards that have been set and how they have been set by.
Oh yes.
Yeah, exactly. So for anyone who's who's been reading all of the stories around Epstein, and so I think that it's waking up to that, and I think that realizing that when you enter midlife, you're just being sold slightly differently packaged shit. It's still the same stuff. It's the same stuff around, you need to be as like slim/skinny as possible in order to look good. But now you've got the sort of additional pressure that you also need to look young, because, no one's going to value you or want to talk to you or will desire you if you don't look young. And so I think it's realizing that those systems of power were never built to lift you up or support you. And I think that there's a rejection that comes with that. I think that definitely there has been a sort of almost trimming away of things that just don't really serve you, that take your energy away. I think that you become a bit more aware. I have become a bit more aware about things that take my energy away. There is a line for me between having a conversation with someone who I think genuinely wants to learn something and is open to hearing something, even if they may have an opposing view to me, versus someone who does not want to do any of that because they don't want to change their worldview, because that's more difficult than actually learning something new. So I think conserving my energy around that. And I think that for me also, when I spoke to my sister and my best mate about this, and I referred to myself as a people pleaser, they were like, "Poorna, you're not." And I was like, "How dare you?" I was like, "How dare you?" But they were like, "You're not." They were like, "You don't agree to do anything that you don't want to do, like, you know." And I just sort of had to reflect on it, and I was like, "Oh, that is true, actually." And that's not how I always used to be. I would, whether it was laughing at someone's joke, whether it was agreeing to go along to something because I felt that the other person wouldn't like me if I didn't. That was definitely something I felt when I was younger. And I think, I don't know if this is a midlife thing, but I just don't have the capacity for small talk anymore. Like, I literally feel like my brain is on fire and I need to leave the room immediately, you know?
Yeah. Like, not enough spoons for this. Yeah. You I lost track of how many women you surveyed. Was it around 1,000?
Yeah.
Yeah. And most of them talked about getting older in terms of things like freedom, contentment, having the options to do what you want, and sort of peacefulness. And when you were asking them about who sort of older people that inspired them, none of them talked about looks. And yet here we are being relentlessly marketed to with all of this anti-aging stuff. I think you've got a stat in the book about the global market for anti-aging treatments being set to be worth 80 billion in 4 years' time, which is just staggering. If you've talked to about sort of just having that sort of same shit but just repackaged, and almost like it's the equivalent to a part-time job we never asked for, on top of all the other stuff that we need to be doing in midlife. What do you think? How can you sort of sum up in the book that sense of how we can move away from that sort of societal pressure as we're aging to look and be a certain way? What are some of the people that you interviewed said to you about how they've approached that?
Yeah, I've been on a real journey with that, because I think that even as recently as maybe a year ago, I think I had a real judgment around people choosing to get cosmetic work done, whether, that's like Botox or filler or something more substantial. And I think I felt like it was, while I understood that it was everyone's choice to do whatever they want, I felt like it was just feeding into a cycle where if we just kept doing this over and over and over again, we were never going to get to a place where women are liberated from that. And I think what I've changed my opinion since then, because I think for a number of reasons, which is it's really not my place to judge other people, whether it is the conversation around body image, whether it is the conversation around aging, each of us has to experience the world in terms of it being deeply fat phobic and deeply ageist. And the wear and tear of that mentally, depending on, whatever your intersections or whatever you look like, varies. And for some people, that load is just too much and they don't want to carry it. And I have to respect and understand that, because we all have different things that we're carrying in our lives. And maybe that is just something that makes their life easier, that makes them feel good in that moment. And so I think also someone who I interviewed in the book around this. So I interviewed Louisa Dunn, who is this amazing activist who talks a lot about sort of aging along the natural timeline. But I also then interviewed a friend of mine, Anita Bhagwandas, who's a brilliant beauty journalist who has a really measured view on all of this stuff, which is that expecting women to carry the burden for this it's not, no one's going to just decide to do this because of the collective good, because you as an individual still have to experience society in all its difficulties and judgment against you as a person, depending on your social circle. So expecting people, especially women, to quote marks do the right thing and age naturally is just not going to be the thing that
Take
works.
one for the team.
Yeah. yeah, so that I think was something that was really interesting to unpick, which is that's just not going to work as an approach. And so really I think that there needs to be space and support for people regardless of what it is they're doing in terms of how they're choosing to age. So if you are someone, for example, who has had work done, or you're considering having work done, it's about maybe having that conversation around it in a less judgmental way. So, are there things, for example, that could be done that maybe don't require like a medical route, whatever that might be? There's also something to be said for if women are using phrases like, I just want to look like myself again, I want to look better. It's not, it's just, it's, you're not going to get anywhere by like yelling and shaming people, so it's just gently guiding them along a series of questions of, okay, so what does that mean when we say we want to look better? What are, like Heidi Clements does this, who, she's this amazing person on Instagram who does mixes storytelling and fashion, and talks a lot about this, and it's just saying, what does better mean? Because better for most people means looking younger. And if you're living in a society that does not sanction or endorse getting older as a good thing, looking older as a good thing, then all you're ever going to think looking better is looking younger. And for people, for example, who don't have the money to spend on things like Botox and filler, what is the space for them? What are we saying? Is it, like, how do they feel about themselves? And so really for me, it's more of a kind of gentle approach that whatever stage you're at in your life, can we create our surroundings and a society in a way so that you're not constantly feeling like you're striving towards some standard which doesn't exist anyway? Like, how do you feel restful and peaceful within your own body and what your face looks like, and can you achieve that, and how do you achieve that? Because my only reservation with getting like work done is that I don't know that a person gets that done and then they're cool, then they're okay. Because I think if that was the case, we wouldn't have things like filler blindness, where, someone becomes accustomed to the amount of filler, for example, they start putting in their face, and that's why they continue to put more and more and more, because they adjust to what they look like in that
Oh
moment.
gosh, is that a thing?
Yeah. And so but
Yeah.
so I think it is, for me, I think it is about aging, talking about aging in a way that doesn't shame people for what they want their choices to be. And, okay, I've never had cosmetic work done. It's very unlikely that I will, because also I'm shit scared of needles. And the idea of one going near my face that's like not for like essential surgery just freaks me out. But I do really like skincare, and there are some people that would look down on me for that and would be like, "Oh God, I can't believe you spend all of that money on creams or whatever." And I'm like, "Well, I like how it feels really luxurious and nice for my face." And maybe, yeah, there is something ageist in that, and maybe, I should go I should go out into the world with nothing on my face. But I also just feel like you're just like striving and trying your best to do your best in a really difficult world. So just do what makes you happy, but just be aware of what some of these things are anchored to. And the fact is that for some of us, they're a hamster wheel that we might never get off.
You wrap up the book by thinking about sort of conversations with our mothers, and you talk about some of the conversations that you had with your own mum. What came out of those conversations for you? Did you sort of see your mother in a slightly different light after having those conversations?
I don't know that I saw her in a different light. As in, it didn't unlock, it wasn't like there was this hidden part of her and then I saw it and then I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense now of who you are or whatever. It was more just, I don't think I realized how much she had been blocked during her younger life. Like, as in, I'm talking about her teens and her 20s. And I think that when I say blocked, I mean from progressing in her career, in her education. And I think that it's something that she still finds really difficult to talk about now.
Really?
because I could, when I interviewed her, I could see that she was like correcting herself as she went along, because I think she sort of felt like she was sort of saying something she maybe shouldn't. But basically, the sort of the long and short of it is that my mother didn't go to university. She had a place at university, and back in those days, like everything was paid for. She came from a family that was not wealthy at all. I don't even know how well they were doing, to be honest. Both my grandparents were teachers, and they were earning like a very small salary. But her dad wouldn't let her go to university because it would have meant taking room and board with a family who he didn't really approve of. So she didn't go to university, and that's always been like a really, really big thing for her. And then even when she sort of like went into the workplace, and I think she worked for HMRC or something, and they were like, "Oh, you should take like the auditor's exams." And her dad was like, "Oh, well, you're going to be going back to India to get married soon or whatever, so there's no point." And I think that for me, when I was listening to her talk about it, I felt such rage. I just felt such rage, and I just felt so emotional. But like I was interviewing her, so I couldn't show her that I was getting emotional.
Mm.
And it sounds mad to say this, because obviously this is my mother, right? The roles are that she nurtures and looks after me. But I think what I would not have given to have been able to be the person that I am now, to be able to go back in time and be the person that she needed, I think was something that like really, really hit home to me. And it also, I think, underlined. So I have an 11-year-old niece, and I have a very, very close relationship with my sister,
Mm.
and who, includes me and lets me be part of my niece's life as much as possible, and keeps me updated about everything that she's up to and so on. But it underlined how important my role is in that. Like, my niece is already very lucky that she has her own mother and, her father, who will support her in a way that, let's say, someone like my mother didn't have. But that kind of like protective role is something that I take very seriously. And I think that for me is something I will always be incredibly sad for my mother, because as a person, as a younger person, I could see like how much potential she had, like she could have been like the CEO of a company. Like, she's so clever. She's got so much energy. And I think she did go on to like, she worked as a project manager for big lottery fund, which like, used money to go back into like community projects and so on. And she did really, really well for herself, all things considered. But I could see the potential, and I could see the brightness of her as a younger person.
Mm.
And the fact that she was not allowed, or to she wasn't really supported in the way that she needed to step into that, is something that just weighs very heavy on me, I think.
Yeah. And how many other instances of that kind of wasted potential? It's all over the
Yeah,
yeah.
it's made me a lot more softer with my mother, I would say. I know it's not always an easy conversation to have, but I think that, for anyone whose mum is still around, and if you have a relationship with your mum, I think asking them questions about a time before you were on the scene, so that their answers are not then defensive. They're not like, because they're not connected to you as a person. They're just telling you a story about themselves. I think it's a very, very important thing to have. It's made me definitely be a lot softer with my mother, a lot more compassionate, a lot more understanding, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to be able to do that now. Unfortunately, my mum's got late stage Alzheimer's, so the ship has sailed on that one. But yeah, definitely, if you've got your mum around, and if, as you say, you've got a good relationship, investing a bit of time in
Yeah.
finding out more about their sort of early adulthood and teenagehood, and what it was like for them, would be so precious. We're running out of time, but I just wanted to say as well that I was a huge fan of the book before this one, which is Stronger. If people haven't read that one, I would definitely recommend buying them as a pair, because I think they do go very, very nicely together. But yes, do tell us, where else can people find you in the online space if they want to connect with you and your work?
So I am chronically online. So you can find me on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And my handle is at Poorna Bell. And I think the book you can just basically get anywhere that you normally get your books.
We'll put some links in the show notes. But yeah, what do you talk about on TikTok? I was having a conversation just earlier with people about people coming off TikTok because of the sort of surveillance element. So I'm curious that you're on it.
I mean, I just assume that surveillance is everywhere. So it's just, I think with TikTok, it's really interesting because it's just different to Instagram, because I feel like with Instagram, people are plugged into who you are. Because of how TikTok works, you only see videos as they mainly pop up in your feed. So you don't really see people's content in sequence, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So in a way, actually, it's really freeing because you don't have to, I don't think you have to curate what you post quite in the same way that you do with Instagram. But it's still very early days. I'm still trialing and testing things, but mostly I just go on there to like guff about various things that make me angry. So yeah.
Well, plenty of scope for that right now. There's lots to be angry about in the world, but lots of good things too. So yeah, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. She wanted more. By the time this is out on general release, the book will be out on general release too. So yeah. Do go and get yourself a copy. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Middling Along podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please go and leave us a review over at Apple Podcasts. You can check out the full back catalogue of all our episodes over at middlingalong.com. You can also find out more about my work as a coach. Go to www.thetripleshift.org.